Okay, so Afghanistan. It's definitely back in the conversation lately, hasn't it? Especially with President Trump talking about, well, maybe going back in somehow.
Yeah, it's really stirred things up, this whole idea of, maybe getting Bagram Airbase back online, potentially by striking some kind of deal with the Taliban. It's incredibly complex.
It really is. And we know you listening want to get straight to the heart of these big geopolitical questions without, getting bogged down. So that's what we're trying to do today.
Exactly. We're going to try and cut through the noise. And our main guide for this is an interesting piece from the National Interest. It's by Abdullah Khenjani. He's with the National Resistance Front.
Right. So he offers a pretty critical viewpoint, which is important context.
Mhm.
Okay, let's dive in. Trump's interest seems to stem, first off, from his criticism of the Biden withdrawal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big part of it. And then there are sort of two main things he's mentioned wanting to achieve. First, getting back all that American military gear left behind.
Uh-huh.
And second, the strategic value of Bagram itself.
Okay, let's take the equipment first. Trump's talked about billions worth. But Khenjani's article, it paints a very different scene on the ground.
It really does. It suggests, it's not like there's just a pile of working U.S. gear sitting there waiting.
Right.
Most of it is probably unusable, or it was, deliberately broken by U.S. forces on the way out. Or, and this is key, it's already been sold off or given away by the Taliban.
Sold off. Wow. The article actually mentions who might have it.
It does, and this is pretty concerning. It names groups like Al-Qaeda, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, insurgents in Kashmir, Pakistan, basically spreading conflict.
American weapons turning up in all those places.
Yeah.
That's a major implication of the withdrawal, the way it happened.
Definitely. It highlights the sort of ripple effects and the difficulty in tracking everything now. So, okay, besides the equipment, the other big factor is Bagram Air Base itself.
Yeah, its location. Trump specifically mentioned its value for watching China, right, near the Xinjiang region.
Exactly. For observation, which, adds another layer entirely, given the whole U.S.-China dynamic. How would Beijing even see a U.S. presence right there?
And wasn't there some talk, some fear that China might try and take over Bagram? I think the Pentagon denied that, though.
They did, yeah.
I
The
mean,
DOD pushed back on that.
yeah.
But that worry might still be, part of the calculation for Trump thinking about negotiating with the Taliban for access.
So the thinking is the Taliban want legitimacy.
Well, that seems to be the potential leverage,
Yeah.
according to Khenjani. The Taliban, they control the country, but, no major power actually recognizes their government, not even their allies, really.
Mm-hmm.
So this desire for international standing, for, aid recognition, the seat at the table, maybe that makes them willing to talk, willing to deal.
But Khenjani's main point, the core of his argument in the article is basically absolutely not. Don't legitimize them.
Precisely. He strongly opposes any U.S. deal that would give the Taliban that kind of recognition.
And when you look at what the article says about the human rights situation there, it's hard to argue with his concern.
Yeah, let's shift to that because it's critical.
Yeah.
The article describes really severe restrictions. It calls it gender apartheid.
Wow.
Yeah, women facing just extreme limits on public life, work, education. And it's not just that. There's indoctrination in schools and also really harsh crackdowns on ethnic minorities, non-Pashtun groups.
It sounds grim. And the article also says Afghanistan is becoming a safe haven again for militant groups.
That's another major warning, that it's turning back into a hub, a base for global jihadists.
So, okay, if the U.S. makes a deal, Khenjani argues it basically props up this regime.
Yes, it emboldens their rule, he says. And it also undercuts the internal resistance, the groups who've been fighting the Taliban, often with, very little outside help.
He even mentions humanitarian aid sometimes getting misused by the Taliban.
Right. He points that out to show how difficult it is to engage without inadvertently strengthening them. It's a really tangled situation.
And this ties into the regional stability issue too, right? If it's becoming a hub for extremists.
Absolutely. The article paints a picture of Afghanistan as a sort of command center for lots of different groups.
Like who specifically?
Well, it mentions Al-Qaeda, obviously, ISIS-K, that's the Islamic State affiliate there, the Pakistani Taliban, the TTP, and even cells from Central Asia and Xinjiang.
And these groups aren't just like hiding out, they're active.
Apparently, yes.
Yeah.
Expanding recruitment, rebuilding camps, planning operations, mainly in South Asia, but possibly further afield too. The article connects the Taliban directly, citing, American weapons found at sites where these groups committed atrocities.
Which makes any idea of the Taliban providing security for, say, or reopen Bagram seem questionable?
Very questionable. I mean, if the base reopens, it instantly becomes a massive target for all these anti-American groups.
Right.
And the article brings up the Abbey Gate bombing at Kabul airport during the evacuation.
Yeah, that was awful.
It was. And it raises serious doubts about the Taliban's actual ability, or maybe even willingness, to secure a huge symbolic target like Bagram.
So, if dealing with the Taliban is so risky, according to Khenjani, what's his alternative? He must propose something.
He does. He argues for supporting the Afghan resistance movements instead.
Resistance. Like, who does he mean?
He draws a line back to the United Front, or the Northern Alliance.
Mhm.
Remember them? They were U.S. allies right after 9/11 against the Taliban. Mostly Tajiks, but other groups too.
Okay, yeah, I remember.
Well, a lot of people who fought with the U.S. back then, former soldiers, officials, they're now being targeted by the Taliban. Purges, attacks. So many have joined new resistance groups.
And Bagram itself is in an area where these groups might have support.
It's an interesting point the article makes. Bagram is in a predominantly Tajik area, the same community that was central to the old Northern Alliance.
So Khenjani represents one of these groups, the National Resistance Front, the NRF.
Exactly. He positions the NRF as a democratic alternative,
Yeah.
made up of many former Afghan soldiers who were U.S. allies.
And the argument is helping them gives the U.S. leverage without needing the Taliban.
That's the core idea. Strengthen these groups, people who have already been partners who broadly share democratic values, rather than making the U.S. reliant on the Taliban. It avoids the ethical problems and the security risks.
Okay, so let's just sort of recap the main tension here. On one hand, you have the possible strategic benefit of Bagram, its location.
Right, the perceived pluses.
But weighed against that, you have Khenjani's warnings, the huge risks of legitimizing the Taliban, the human rights disaster, the regional instability, the danger to any U.S. troops.
Exactly. And the main takeaway from his perspective is that a deal with the Taliban could backfire badly. Bad for Afghans, bad for the region's stability, and potentially bad for U.S. security, too. Supporting the resistance, he argues, is the better path.
It definitely leaves you with a lot to think about. You know, looking beyond just the next few years, what kind of American involvement in that region would actually serve U.S. interests and align with what the Afghan people themselves might want beyond just the Taliban?
That's the fundamental question, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are no easy answers, but understanding these different viewpoints, especially from people directly involved like Khenjani, is just essential.